devastating fire swept through this port city's busy warehouse district, crippling the essential commerce of the dock area. This tragedy comes just months after another maritime disaster off the Jacksonville coast when the MS Lake Oswego got stuck on the rocks. But that doesn't slow down this thriving river city. Shipbuilding goes on, and the waters of the beautiful St. Johns River are left open for its more important traffic. Other traffic keeps moving. Jacksonville's new modern airport is taking more people into the skies than ever before. And a growing South Side demands its first theater. Last week, ribbons were cut at the beautiful new movie palace, the San Marco Theater. Reports of this city and its fine fishing opportunities have been heard in Washington. President Roosevelt comes down the coast for some much-needed rest and relaxation in North Florida's sportsman's paradise.
Okay, that's enough. That's something we put together ourselves. It's the sort of thing you might have seen 50 years ago, but you wouldn't have seen it here. This is a modern multi-screen movie house. It seats about 200, and when you come here to see a movie, the movie is about all you'll see. In this theater, you would have seen more. Along with the newsreel, you would have seen 2 features, shorts, cartoons, and you would have seen them along with about 2,000 other people. And as if this wasn't enough, sometimes there was live entertainment too. As a young girl, Virginia Ada Keys used to perform here.
Saturday morning at the Florida Theater was amateur day before the feature, and it gave us an opportunity to really star. Being a child, this was so huge, I thought it was the largest theater in the world.
Jacksonville was not a changing city during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. It stayed pretty much the same, but was still a very different place from the one we know today. It was smaller, the population was about 1/5 of what it is now, and downtown was the heart of the city, alive at all hours of the day. But after World War II, it began to change. Eventually, downtown became the ghost town we know it as today. The revitalization program may bring life back to downtown, but before the city goes off in a new direction, we thought we'd take a look at where it's been. All of the people you'll hear from tonight have lived through this city's recent past. To some of you, it may be ancient history, but these are all memories of people still with us today. You'll hear about a city without bridges, a place where great athletes like Hank Aaron got their start. And you'll hear about a city that may have just missed becoming the movie capital of the world. All of those places were Jacksonville, and it all happened right here in River City. Before the days of Hollywood talkies, Jacksonville had a booming silent film industry. Severe winters up north sent movie makers south in search of a warm, sunny climate and scenic backdrops. Since Jacksonville was only 30 hours from New York by train, it seemed the ideal spot. Most of the city had been destroyed by fire in 1901, but the bulk of its buildings had been rebuilt within a decade. It had a new and modern look. By 1916, Jacksonville was considered the world's winter film capital. 30 companies worked here on and off during the season. Most movies made here were comedy shorts that lasted about 10 minutes. Films were shot in outdoor studios to take full advantage of the free sunlight. Others were shot on location. It wasn't unusual to see chase scenes filmed down Main Street. In this 1916 production of Bouncing Baby, the chase actually left the street and ended up on top of the St. James building, which today is May Cohen's department store. The Kalem Company was the first production house to arrive in Jacksonville.
Where I stand was practically the location of the studio right in through here, where the stages were, the prop rooms, and where they took the pictures.
Ruth James and her mother ran the boarding house for the stars of Kalem movies over 70 years ago. Her close association with the actors and actresses landed her many bit parts in movies filmed off of Talleyrand Avenue.
This is where our studio used to be.
Sidney Vaughn was studio business manager for Gaumont on the south side.
Our stage was right here where these palm trees are. It was about 100 by 75. And we had a group of houses along here that were rooming houses, and the actors and property men and stuff like that used to live in there.
Ruth and Sidney are one of the few links left to Jacksonville's movie past. The two hadn't seen each other for several years until we brought them together.
I'm feeling pretty good, and you look pretty good,
Thank
too.
you. People in Jacksonville just don't believe that Ruth and I worked in the movie business in those days. It's hard for them to believe. That's a long time ago. Everybody that we knew, they're gone.
Oh, yes.
But back in the early 1900s, crowds formed to watch the movies being made, and they flocked to the theaters to see the finished product.
We made a lot of outdoor scenes down at the beach. We used the beach sand for desert, also for snow.
Many of the film stars called Jacksonville home in those days, and Ruth James was part of their inner circle of friends.
We would just get together in the living room after dinner and just have a gay old time, you know, singing and being together. We had about 3 or 4 leading ladies. Alice Joyce was one of them, and she took me to the Seminole Hotel downtown, and we had caviar and just to be sort of picked out to go with somebody as wonderful as she was and a star, it was quite exciting for me.
A heavy-set comedian from Georgia by the name of Babe Hardy got his first movie break in Jacksonville with the Lubin Company on Riverside Avenue. Babe was a nickname given to the young Oliver Hardy by a barber in Jacksonville. Later, of course, Babe teamed up with Stan Laurel to form the famous Laurel and Hardy. Fat boy comedies were popular in the teens, and Babe was naturally in demand. In this 1916 release of Hungry Hearts, shot in various locales of Jacksonville, Hardy was paired with Billy Rouge in the comedy team of Plump and Runt.
I've had a few drinks with him. I've had a drink with him in the Pastime Bar on Main Street. He was a nice guy, nice fellow to be with. He was a comedian, and he played at it.
The comedy and drama that played on the screen was all silent with subtitle inserts. Because the actors knew that most people in the audience couldn't read lips, they often joked with one another during a scene and the audience wouldn't know it. As a result, their mouths often didn't match what they were supposed to be saying.
Sometimes they'd be talking about their holiday or trip to the beach, or we ought to go in and have a drink at the bar, and anything in the world. But
the people of Jacksonville may have been unaware of the tricks of movie making, but were upset by some of the pranks that went along with it.
Sometimes false alarms were turned in just because the movie called for a shot of a racing fire engine. And the enthusiasm of local extras also caused a few problems. 1,300 extras called out to play the part of a mob turned into a real one here at the corner of Davis and Monroe Street. The 2-story building was nearly destroyed.
Dangerous stunts, filming on Sundays, and the freer lifestyles of some of the actors all seemed to sour Jacksonville residents to the movie industry. Film executives had their own complaints. They felt local merchants charged unfair rates for costume and prop rentals, forcing them to ship required goods from New York. At one point, a homeowner charged $100 for one shot in front of his house.
They thought all the movie actors and all the grips and the property man and the cameraman and all those people made a lot of money. And they charged them. Boy, they really did.
After a while, Jacksonville and the movie makers got fed up with each other. So the movie moguls packed up their glamour, excitement, and multi-million-dollar industry and went to a smaller, more tolerant coastal city.
You might have heard of it. It's called Hollywood.
The population of Jacksonville was just under 100,000 people then, all of them on the north bank of the St. Johns River. Another city was on the south bank. That one was called South Jacksonville. To get from one to the other, you had to deal with the river. You could swim, of course, but most people took the ferries.
The ferry was my father's livelihood.
As a child, the ferry was also Bob Broward's playground.
Once aboard the ferry, and it started chugging its way across, there were ice cream bars, Eskimo pies, these things kids would love, you know, to eat. And you could go up and sit on the upper deck and see the water and feel the breeze. And then the whistles, the toot of the whistles and the bells, especially when I was down in the engine room with my father, and the captain would give the bells for reverse or forward or half speed or quarter speed. It was just a delight, you know. When you're a little tight, like this and you're going through all that, you feel, gee, I'm really somebody. My daddy's running this boat, so.
The ferries operated into the 1940s. What put them out of business were bridges. The first one, later named the Acosta Bridge, opened in 1921 to the delight of hundreds of onlookers. Christine Crutchfield was there.
It was July the 1st, hot as it could be, but oh, the people of Jackson were so excited because this was really a milestone for everybody who was living here then. A whole new world was opened up. It made 2 towns into 1 city. After the ribbons were cut by the prettiest gal you ever saw, then in turn you were allowed to bring your cars and ride over the bridge for the first time. This was a great occasion for Jacksonville. We had Hupmobiles, Overlands, Studebakers, and I'm sure there were some Packards in this group. And it was a hot day, and these people came over, turned around to go back, got stuck on the bridge, nothing new.
Under the bridge and along the waterfront, from the present Seaboard Coastline Building to what is now the Jacksonville Shipyards, the river was lined with wharves. The railroad ran across the front of the docks by Bay Street.
Often I would go down on Bay Street and hear any number of languages being spoken, which you don't find in Jacksonville today. You don't even find good English sometimes, but there would be all sorts of languages being spoken because the crews would be in for several days or more from the ships, and they would be along Bay Street.
This was where shipping was, and the flop houses, and the beer joints, the Silver Dollar Bar, and places like that where the merchant seamen hung out. They would frequently drink excessively, curse excessively, and fight excessively.
The other side of the river was a different story. In sharp contrast to the busy docks on the north bank, where people came to work, the riverfront on the south bank, where Friendship Park is now, was where some people came to live.
This was all one big mud flat, and where we see the fountain and the park, and over here the new Prudential building. Obviously that wasn't here, but what was here were groups of houseboats where people lived in a poverty level. There were little walkways, docks that went out to them, very rickety. And the whole thing was almost like a little Hong Kong. It's difficult to realize that's what was here. But this was truly a river city, and that was part of it.
I didn't know anything about Riverside. I never went out there, because that was foreign country.
While downtown Jacksonville was the heart of the city, the outlying areas were more isolated. Growing up in the 1920s and 30s, these fellows remember a Jacksonville without telephones or ready transportation.
It's the fact that the distances and the communication, the transportation put the barriers up. And I mean, you kept your own life in your end of town.
I remember walking from downtown over the Acosta Bridge out here on the river many a night because I didn't have any other transportation. I mean, the streetcar had stopped running. The only way to get home is walk home about 6-7 miles. So you just kept walking.
I think you have to understand at that time it was not the Acosta Bridge, it was simply the bridge. I know that's going to offend Eddie.
No, that don't offend me at all because that's the way it was.
There were not the freeways, the interstates, the expressways in the 20s and 30s. There were 2-lane roads, and maybe Phillips Highway Route 1 was built in the 30s. That was a 4-lane road, but that was the only 4-lane road by and large.
Even if the roads had existed, most people didn't have cars to drive on them. So about the only way to get around was by trolleys or streetcars.
I'm going to walk where I think the tracks must have been. Right down here, you see, the trolley came straight down this street about, I'd say, to where Riverside Avenue is now. And then the conductor would get off and walk along the side, reverse the trolley, turn all the seats so you'd be facing towards town when you rode to town, and off you'd go. You can see the old tracks. A lot of the bricks have been laid on top.
The trolleys would only go so far. If you wanted to go farther, you usually took the train. Railroads were the interstate highways of the day, and train stations, like Jacksonville's Union Terminal, were the cloverleafs.
This railroad station was one of the symbolic centers of downtown Jacksonville.
Jacksonville's welcome to the world is really what it was. Everybody was going to South Florida. It looked exactly like a Hollywood movie set, that you got all those people from Central Casting.
You just couldn't hardly work your way through. 3,000 or 4,000 people.
It was like the Atlanta airport.
Today there is no one place where you can go to see who is coming and going in Jacksonville. Highways and a distant airport allow people to whiz right through, catching only a glimpse of the downtown area. In fact, the skyline itself has virtually been replaced. Someone returning after a 40-year absence wouldn't recognize it at all. Albert and Marjorie Duran's son had only been gone a few years when he came back for a visit.
We just can't visualize that. We just can't comprehend that he couldn't find his way home, that he certainly should be able to after these years.
I've lived here all my life, and several times I've really gotten lost on the edges of Jacksonville. I simply didn't know where I was.
A long drive headed out towards center field. We may have one. It's home run for Henry Aaron on his first time up.
And the Florida Gators capitalized on a block punt in the second period to garner a victory in Jacksonville. Gators 6, Bulldogs nothing.
The year was 1937. Not a remarkable Florida-Georgia game by anyone's standards, but it was the Gators' first win in Jacksonville. The game had only been played here 4 times, although the rivalry goes back much further. This stadium has always been the site for the game in Jacksonville, but it wasn't always called the Gator Bowl. Back then it was Municipal Stadium. The field faced the other way, and the stands only held 20,000 people. Otis Boggs was one fan who had a stake in that November game.
I was a freshman in '37, and they had a tradition at the University of Florida. If you beat Georgia, you didn't have to wear your rat caps or beanies after Christmas. It had never happened before, so all the freshmen went wild. We had something that no other freshman class had. We didn't have to wear those rat caps.
Watson Ramsey and Ed Manning helped lead the Gators to victory in that game. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. They met in a much different-looking Municipal Stadium.
Let's see, 37. What is that, 46, 7 years?
37 from 84 is
47 years.
47 years.
Yeah, I've been married 45 years. I can't hardly remember when I was playing ball.
About that long, too.
Georgia was just about to score, and Blaylock intercepted that pass and ran it way back, and that made the difference. They had to play both offense and defense. And the better players had to play the whole 60 minutes, and naturally you're tired in the last quarter. And we just didn't have the reserve strength that they have today.
If you went in the ball game, very seldom you come out.
Watson, come in.
Oh, and I can take a short one.
We tend to think of Jacksonville as a football town, but believe it or not, some of baseball's biggest stars got their start right here in River City.
I played on the Jacksonville Braves baseball team, and 30 years ago at Old Durkee Field.
It was the beginning of a baseball career that will go down as one of the greatest, smashing Babe Ruth's record with 755 home runs. Hank Aaron played here for the minor league farm team of the Milwaukee Braves.
I've always said it was the turning point of my career, really.
And Hank turned a few heads in 1953. At 19, he helped the Jacksonville Braves win the pennant for the first time in 41 years and was the South Atlantic League's most valuable player.
I hit very well. I hit well over 350. It was a very, very good ball club. I mean, a very good ball club. You know, I think 7 or 8 or 9 of us off that ball club eventually went to the big leagues.
Dick Stratton remembers that year and that player. As a young broadcaster, he covered the Jacksonville Braves for Channel 4. The first time he saw Hank Aaron was during spring training in Waycross, Georgia.
Ben Garrity, one of the great managers of all times, called me over and said, I want to show you something. One of the great hitters you'll ever see. Watch this fella's natural ability. And then he said, that is a Hall of Fame swing. Henry Aaron will make the Hall of Fame. His first time up in Jacksonville, Florida, and hit a pitch over the center field wall, and they hadn't seen one hit out of the park, let alone the center field wall. So the 1953 season was off to a sparkling start.
But the going wasn't easy for young black athletes. The South was still racially divided, and Jacksonville was no exception. Jackie Robinson had entered Major League Baseball in 1947, but the minor leagues in the South were not so progressive. Hank Aaron was one of the first black ball players allowed in the South Atlantic League.
When we went into a city, the bus quite naturally would pull over and carry the white players to the hotel, the convenience of the hotel, and then they would carry us to either a private home or to YMCA, someplace where we would be in the black section of the city. And after the game was over with, we had to find our way back to where we were staying. No, we couldn't eat at the restaurants. You know, that was out of the question.
But by mid-season, the success of Hank Aaron and the Jacksonville Braves brought some racial harmony to the ballpark.
And the boos turned into cheers, you know, and the rabbit calling and all those other names eventually was going away, you know. For the first time, I saw black and white leaving the ballpark all over the leagues talking about ball games.
Today, Hank Aaron is still with the Braves as vice president for player development. His major league records are staggering. From most home runs to most career extra bases to most career runs batted in, and the list goes on. He is truly one of baseball's modern-day legends. Yet, there are many people in Jacksonville that don't know he started at a ballpark on Myrtle Avenue. Others don't know of him at all.
A friend of mine called me up the other day and told me, he said, you know, he was telling me, he said, Hank, he said, this is a funny story. He said, I went to this school, and this must have been the 8th, 9th grade kids, you know, and they started talking about baseball, and somebody brought up Hank Aaron, and somebody said, well, Hank Aaron knows my daddy. And the other kid said, no, Hank Aaron's dead, you know. And, you know, that happens, you know. It's just nothing I can do about it other than to say that, yes, I played in Jacksonville. I played there and I enjoyed it.
But that was in the 1950s. 20 or 30 years earlier, Hank Aaron would not have been able to play here because Jacksonville was a city divided.
Part of the history that we're not very proud of is the segregation. The reality that white Jacksonville and black Jacksonville were virtually two different cities, and that black Jacksonville had their own entertainment, they had their own churches, they had their own schools. They worked often for white Jacksonville in menial jobs at low pay. The facilities were segregated from movies to schools to streetcars, you name it.
Hogan Creek, flowing in this neighborhood, served as a dividing line, unofficially of course, between the white and the black neighborhood here.
Mrs. Hetty Mills was a nurse at Brewster Hospital, a facility that treated only black patients. She lived in the nurses' residence next door. Her neighborhood was different from other black neighborhoods in Jacksonville at the time. Most were poor, but this was an elite section. Beautiful homes that could be compared to Riverside and Avondale stood along 8th Street between Davis and Jefferson. Doctors, lawyers, school teachers, and other black professionals lived in this neighborhood that some called Sugar Hill. The houses are gone now. During the late 60s, Jacksonville's nicest black neighborhood was leveled to make way for 2 large hospitals.
Over here, where you see this side of Methodist Hospital, the streets have been closed because of the expansion of the hospital, all the way down from the intersection of Jefferson. And then, of course, on the other side, you have the homes have all been torn down, all the way on 8th Street, both sides of Calhoun, to give way to the hospital area. The homes have been demolished. The persons have been relocated.
One neighborhood that still stands is Ashley Street, the 600 block. You'd never know looking at it now, but between the 1920s and 40s, it was the hottest black entertainment spot in Jacksonville.
This was the block. The block. Everything happened in here. You name it, it happened in here.
Charlie Singleton has been in the entertainment business all his life. He produced variety shows and became nationally known when he wrote one of Frank Sinatra's biggest hits, Strangers in the Night. On Ashley Street, he rubbed elbows with the big bands. Today, few of his cronies are left to reminisce about the days when this street was swinging.
Hey, baby. Hey. How y'all doing? Right around. They were all in the middle of the streets like they'd be in Vegas, you know. Everything was happening. You had a nightclub over there, the Bronx nightclub. You had Manuel, who had entertainment in the back there. You had entertainment upstairs here in Charlie Ed. Bars were open all night, Sunday too.
Black jazz greats and swing bands played Jacksonville in the 30s and 40s, but because the city was strictly segregated, white Jacksonville, for the most part, didn't even know they were here. The bands performed only in black neighborhoods.
This is the Hollywood Music Store. This is the music store, and the guy that ran it named Joe Higdon, who bought in all the big bands. He bought in Louis Armstrong, he bought in Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, Andy Kirk, Walter Barnes, Erskine Hawkins, Buddy Johnson, you name them. Everybody of any note, he bought them in here. Over here was the Richmond Hotel. Upstairs there, this is where all the classic band leaders and entertainers stayed. This was about the cream of the crop for Black Jacksonville then. They used to have a balcony right up there, and the entertainer would come out and the crowd would be all in the street, and he'd wave to the crowd and everything. I used to be up there with them, you know. Would you hear when they had all that jazz concert? Oh, yeah. Well, you heard Sarah Vaughan mention about the Blue Chip Hotel? Well, that's the Blue Chip Hotel. Listen to me good. It's a guy named R.C. Robinson. This is where you had to come to find him when you want him. You know who R.C. Robinson, what R.C. stands for? Ray Charles, the great Ray Charles. This is where he sat all the time. Anytime you wanted him to play a gig or anything like that, you'd find him here. Now, he lived on a block from here.
While Ashley Street was the hub of black entertainment in Jacksonville, the most famous nightclub of them all was several miles away on Moncrief Road. The Two Spot opened in 1940. More than 1,000 couples filled the dance floor, moving to the sounds of Duke Ellington or Billie Holiday. It was Black Jacksonville's last major night spot. Today, an apartment complex stands in its place.